The latest in the portal for Colorado. Where could Cormani McClain end up? Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me here to discuss. So, actually, hold on. We got to pause. Do I have your X handle right? It's down at the bottom of the screen. Is it just at Kevin Borba?
You throwing a couple.
Colorado continues to be busy in the portal, both reaching out to players and having players depart. Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me here on the show. Let's start with Cormani McClain. Kevin, what's the latest that you are hearing? Where might the former 5-star and number 1 cornerback recruit in the class of 2023 end up?
Yeah, I think Cormani is probably going to end up closer to home. Obviously, Boulder, Colorado is a long way away from Lakeland, Florida, and I think schools like Miami and Florida, who are both heavily in the mix for his recruitment, the first time around are schools to look out for. If he does have an interest in kind of staying away from home, I know Utah would be interested or at least be in the mix there. He visited BYU on an unofficial during his recruiting process, which is like a random thing that most people overlook. So look out for the Florida schools. I would also look out for maybe like a South Carolina, but I do expect him to kind of return at least closer to home a little bit, just because sometimes it doesn't work out when you venture away from home.
Yeah, and certainly, Miami was heavily involved in his recruitment. I talked about that on yesterday's show, but I'm interested to hear you say Utah, because you're talking about a guy with all the physical traits to be a high-end corner and all-conference sort of guy. Didn't work out at Colorado. And by the way, Deion, of course, legendary defensive back, but the rest of the defensive staff that was in place last year, let's just say they've changed defensive staffs, and I don't think anybody in Colorado is necessarily upset about that. Utah, on the other hand, has one of the best, most consistent defensive head coaches in Kyle Whittingham in all of college football. I think the Utes would be an outstanding place for him to go.
Yeah, I think realistically it comes down to how much does he care about his development. Because if he cares about his development, then Utah's the place to be. Florida and Miami both have coaching staffs on the hot seat. So do you really want to risk going?
Well, Florida a little more than Miami, but
right. But
yeah.
like if they both have sub 500 seasons, Florida, like you said, a little bit more, then you're going to be playing for a new coaching staff again in this time of next year. If you go to Utah, Kyle Whittingham has been a staple there. He's been there, I think, both of our whole lives, if I'm not mistaken. Like
I believe this is year 19 he's going into.
Almost all of our lives. But it's one of those things where it's like he has the chance to really harness his talent. We did not see him harness his talent. He gave up. He was torched, realistically, when he played at Colorado. He had a couple bright moments, but he was consistently torched. I think it's unfortunate that him and Coach Prime couldn't figure out a way to make it work, because obviously learning from the best corner in NFL history is quite the person to learn from. But again, sometimes things don't always work out. People aren't how you expected them to be, and situations aren't how you expected them to be. So Utah would be a great fit, I would say, if he's willing to focus on his development and not focus on just getting back closer to home.
Yeah, I love the point you made about the coaching continuity. Florida will certainly want to get a guy of this caliber with Billy Napier and company, but like you said, they've got the hardest schedule in all of college football. They might not be around next season, depending on how this year goes. So what other Buffs have entered the transfer portal? Because, as I again mentioned on yesterday's show, Colorado's really feeling both sides of the transfer portal, because they are in the running for some notable recruits. They are also having a good number of players leave the program. And apparently, if you want to go to Colorado, you just shoot Shiloh Sanders a DM.
Yeah, just shoot him a DM if you play defense. Shoot Shador a DM if you play offense. Really weird sort of advertising, but
very weird.
Who knows? That's the Colorado experience these days. In terms of portal losses, because I think that's what we were talking about before we decided they're weird, weird things. Miles Slusher is one that stands out to me, but the other one that's not getting talked about enough is Jaden Milner-Jones. He started quite a few games for them last year. I think he played in all 12, and he was a secondary member that was an under-recruited defensive back that was making more of an impact. And not to go back to Cormani, but there was a lot of why is this kid playing well and Cormani isn't? And so he played quite well. And realistically, the one position that they loaded up on in the portal thus far, and probably will add more talent to, is the secondary. And so I think he just kind of felt like he was maybe getting pushed out of the starting lineup or having a chance to start, because they brought in veterans. And sometimes you just get outranked by guys in experience, and it's okay. But he's someone who I think he'll be a Power 5 transfer, and I do think he could be the starter somewhere else.
Another guy who will be a Power 5 transfer is running back Dallan Hayden, who has been tied to Colorado. He reportedly had a phone call with Deion Sanders yesterday morning about the possibility of coming to the Buffs. Have you heard anything since then, and how big of an addition would that be?
Yeah, I've heard Colorado is, I won't say really pushing for him, but they want him. A lot of programs want him. He's kind of an odd case in Ohio State. If you look at his freshman years, like freshman year, he had over 500 yards rushing. On his career, he averages over 5 yards per carry, and so he's gonna be a hot commodity regardless of like what program it is. But if you're Colorado, they need him. I've been harping on the running back position for quite some time. Dylan Edwards, he's 5'9". Like they say he's 170-ish. I would be shocked. He's going to be moved out to wide receiver a lot more this year. Their other running back, Michael Welch, is a freshman, so it depends on how much you want to trust a true freshman to be the leader of your backfield. And then they have Alton McCaskill, the Houston transfer from last year. Hasn't played a meaningful snap since 2021. He played like a few games last season and realized he wasn't ready to return from injury. And so that's a lot of ifs in that running back room. You bring in someone who is healthy, who has proven himself a little bit, and just needs a chance to start. And I think that's where Dallan Hayden comes into the mix. I think he could be their starting running back, or at worst could be someone that they could rotate in, because injuries happen, ineligible things happen, like guys struggle academically, whatever it may be, you never know. And so you just want to have as many available bodies as possible, and having one that's Power 5 experience and played at one of the best programs in the country really helps.
Yeah, and Hayden's heard from Auburn is on the list, Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech both on the list. Louisville is on the list as well. I think there might be one more school in the mix, but certainly he's a highly coveted guy, pretty highly rated 4-star recruit coming out of high school, and I think has that starting potential, just needs the right opportunity, which is why the fit with the Buffs could be there. But when I hear you say he can push to be RB1, well, maybe he'd be able to find a place where he is RB1, because I think that's what he's probably going to be looking for in the transfer portal, given his first 2 years of college football. Let's look elsewhere for the Buffs in the portal here, Kevin. What moves have you liked so far from the first portal window, and what is still left to be desired for this roster as they try to at least make a bowl game in 2024?
Yeah, so I like their moves in the across the defense line, whether it's pass rushers, interior defense linemen. They got size, they got girth, Spencer. They didn't have girth last year. They were getting shoved around all over the place.
Yeah.
They got a guy like Anquin Barnes from Alabama who didn't play, but he comes in at 6'5", like 315 pounds. Like, dude is a monster. He's ginormous. They got Quincy Wiggins from LSU, former 4-star recruit. And then they got guys who actually did have some playing experience, like Torian Carter. And then you look at their pass rushers. BJ Green, who I know you're quite familiar with.
Yes, good
had
player.
5 sacks, all second. I think he was all Pac-12 second team last year. And then they got a guy from Pitt named Samuel. I always butcher his last name, so I call him Samuel O. He also had 5 sacks.
Okunlola?
Yes, sure. I think it's Okunalola is how I say it sometimes. I'm all over the place. I just go with it however I feel that day. But he had 5 sacks, and he wasn't really in the starting lineup for the Panthers last year. So you get him and BJ Green opposite sides, and Colorado has a pass rush. So I like them there. I like the receivers, even though they didn't really need that many receivers. They brought in some talented ones. LeJonte Wester is probably the fastest guy in the country, or at least one of the fastest guys in the country. So they have a lot of talent coming in. Obviously, we got to mention the offensive line as well. They brought in 5 guys, 6 counting Jordan Seaton from the high school ranks. So it'll be interesting to see how those all pan out.
Yeah, the trenches were probably the biggest weakness for the Buffs last year. You think about games that they lost, the blowout against Oregon, their offensive line was just overwhelmed. You look at the game against UCLA, which before the year started, I actually had pegged as a potential upset win for the Buffs. Going into that game, I had changed my pick because, well, I just didn't think that they were going to be able to match up with UCLA's defensive line, which was very good last year, and they were just constantly overwhelmed. I'll get you out of here on this, Kevin. Colorado has had their spring game, yes?
No, at the end of the month.
Right, end of the month. It's all crisscrossing, and my wires are all over the place and such. I think that in that game, Colorado fans will see a Shedeur Sanders that is better protected. Mm-hmm. And you look at the numbers he put up last year when he wasn't protected at all. He was protected the least of any quarterback in all of college football, and those are the numbers that he put up. If that's just a slightly below average offensive line, Shedeur Sanders can have, not exaggerating here, a Heisman caliber year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's that factor, and then I think we talked about it on another episode as well. The new offense is more catered to his skill set. He said so himself. He said that there's more chances for him to choose what routes the receivers run rather than the receivers choosing what route they run, which can get a little confusing at times, and also leads to Shador holding onto the ball. But the offense line is the big part, because even when he wasn't getting pressured, he was probably hurting. He got hit so much where he was probably in pain a lot of the time anyway. The UCLA game that you brought up stands out a lot because they had, I would say, 3 sort of NFL caliber defensive linemen or pass rushers coming at him.
Yeah.
And there's just one play in particular where I think it was an RPO. We'll never know because it got broken up so quickly. But they tackled just both Shador and the running back at the same time. Like they just got both of them at the same time. So Shador just needs a little more time to throw the ball, a little more time to breathe, and he still threw for 27 touchdowns to 3 picks. So he obviously is a very polished quarterback, and I think having, like you said, an average offense line, even below average, would be great. But all the guys they brought in have some sort of high-quality experience. They're not just bringing in guys that they're hoping can play. They brought in some guys that are proven, didn't give up a lot of sacks, and so I think a well-protected Shador Sanders is a Colorado team that can go a lot further than people realize.
Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, the latest from Boulder. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.